I drove a bus for 23 years, nights mostly. Same routes, same stops, same handful of streets that look completely different once the sun goes down and the traffic thins out. You get used to it after a while. You pull to the curb, the hiss of the doors, the quick glance at the fare box, and then back out into the road. It's repetitive work, but not in a bad way. There's a kind of comfort in knowing where you're going, even if you don't know who's getting on next. My name's Cliff Hudson. I started in my late 20s, and I stay longer than I ever planned to. At first, it was just a job that paid steady and didn't require me to sit behind a desk. I figured I'd do it for a few years, maybe save up, move on to something else. Never happened. 1 year turned into 5, then 10, then suddenly I was the guy new drivers asked for advice. Most people think driving a bus is boring. It's not. You see more in one night than most people see in a week. Drunk arguments that start over nothing and turn into something you have to pull over for. People get on just to get warm, riding the line back and forth until you recognize them by sight. Couples fighting quietly in the middle seats, like they forgot anybody else was even there. Kids trying to sneak on without paying attention, acting like you don't notice. But you notice everything. You have to. There are long stretches where nothing happens to. Just you, the road, and the sound of the engine under your feet. Street lights passing at the same pace, one after another, like a metronome. You learn to watch the mirrors without thinking about it. A quick glance to the left, then the right, then up at the rear view. You don't stare or check, it becomes automatic, like breathing. After a while, you start to recognize your regulars. The guy who always gets on at Maple and sits 3 rows back on the right, never says a word, always pays exact fare. The older woman who thanks you every time she steps off, no matter how late it is. The college kids who pile on in groups on Friday night, loud at first, then quiet by the time you drop them off. You don't know their names, but you know their faces. You know where they get on, where they get off, and what kind of night they're probably having. And then there are the ones you don't recognize. That's normal too. Cities are full of people passing through. You get used to that. You don't ask questions. Somebody gets on, they pay, they take a seat, and you keep moving. That's the job. You're not there to figure people out, you're there to get them where they're going. Still, you develop a sense for things. Not instincts like some kind of hero, just experience. You can tell when someone's about to cause trouble before they even open their mouth. You can tell when a situation is about to turn, when a quiet bus is about to get real loud. It's small things. The way someone stands in the aisle instead of sitting. The way they look around like they're checking who's watching them. The way other passengers react. Subtle shifts. People moving seats without saying why. Most of the time it's nothing. Someone's had too much to drink, or they're tired, or they're just having a bad night. You deal with it, or it passes, and by the next stop it's over. That's 99% of the job right there. But not all of it. Every once in a while, something happens that doesn't fit into any of that. Not drunk or tired, not angry, just something else. And the thing about it is, there's never an announcement. Nothing tells you ahead of time that this is going to be one of those nights. Starts the same as any other shift. Same route and stops, same routine. Doors open, somebody gets on, and for a few seconds, everything looks completely normal. And then you check the mirror and something doesn't line up. I didn't go looking for anything like that. I wasn't the kind of guy chasing stories or trying to make sense of things that don't make sense. I showed up, did my route, and went home. That's it. But when you spend that many years driving through the same streets, seeing thousands of faces come and go, you start to notice the ones that don't belong. There are a few nights I still think about. Not every day, most of them faded like everything else does. But a handful didn't. They stayed clear like they happened last week instead of years ago. I can still remember where I was, what time it was, what the air felt like coming through the open window. I don't tell these stories much. There's no point. People hear things like this, and they start looking for explanations, or they assume you're exaggerating. Maybe that's fair. If I heard them from somebody else, I don't know what I'd think either. But I know what I saw. And after 23 years on that bus, I learned something simple. Most passengers get on, ride for a while, and then they get off. And then there are others. Story 1. The Man in the Back. Now this one happened maybe 10 years in, late enough that I knew the route like muscle memory, but not so late that I'd started thinking about retirement yet. It was one of those quiet nights where the city feels like it's already asleep, even though it isn't. No traffic or noise, just the hum of the engine and the occasional set of headlights passing the other way. I was running the North Line, the one that cuts through the older part of town, before looping back toward downtown. That stretch always gets thinner the later it gets. By the time I hit the middle section, I usually had maybe 3 or 4 people left on the bus, sometimes less. That night I had 2. A guy up front, a couple seats behind me, and a woman halfway down the aisle on the right side. Both quiet, both minding their own business. The kind of passengers you forget about 5 minutes after they get off. I pulled up to a stop near an empty strip of road. Not much around except a closed convenience store and a flickering street light that made the whole corner look like it was lagging a second behind itself. I remember thinking I might not even have a pickup there. And then I saw him. He was already standing at the curb when I opened the doors. Hoodie pulled up, hands in his pockets, head angled down just enough that I couldn't see his face clearly. He didn't wave or signal, just stood there, waiting like he knew I was going to stop. He stepped on without saying anything. Dropped exact fare into the box. Not coins tossed in quick, not fumbling. Placed them in one by one, like he was counting carefully. And then he turned and walked straight down the aisle. Didn't look left or right or hesitate. Went all the way to the back and took the last seat. Well, I closed the doors and pulled back into the road. At first there was nothing strange about it. People ride quiet all the time, especially that late. Some don't want to talk, some don't want to be seen. You learn not to push it. But after a minute or two, I heard something. Breathing. It wasn't loud at first, just enough that it cut through the engine noise when the bus slowed down. I checked the mirror without thinking about it. He was leaning forward in his seat, elbows on his knees, head down, shoulders rising and falling a little too hard. I looked back and kept driving. Another minute passed, and then the woman halfway down the bus shifted. I saw her glance back once, quick, like she wasn't trying to be obvious about it. Then she stood up, walked forward, and sat closer to the front. She didn't say anything to me. People don't most of the time, they just move. And that's when I checked the mirror again. The guy in the back had slid off the seat. Not fallen, slid. He was down low, between the seats, shoulders hunched, one arm braced against the floor like he was trying to hold himself up. For a second, I thought he was having a seizure. I've seen that before. You stop the bus, call it in, trying to keep people back. That's protocol. I took my foot off the gas, and I leaned forward a little, trying to get a better angle in the mirror. Hey, you alright back there? No response. Just that same breathing, louder now. The bus rolled a few more feet before I hit the brakes and brought it to a full stop in the lane. I didn't open the doors yet, I just watched. His back started moving differently. Not just rising and falling, jerking. Like something underneath his skin was pulling in the wrong directions. His shoulders tightened, then snapped forward, and then held there for a second too long. The sound changed too. Wasn't just breathing anymore. There was something else under it. Low, rough. I stood up halfway out of my seat. Sir? And that's when his arm slipped. He caught himself on the floor, fingers spread wide, but they didn't look right. Even from the front of the bus, I could see the way they pressed into the rubber flooring. Too tense, too long. He shifted again, and his head hit the back of the seat in front of him with a dull thud. Not like he felt it, more like he didn't notice at all. The woman up front stood up behind me. "What's wrong with him?" she asked. "Stay up here," I began. Just stay up here." I stepped into the aisle a few paces. Not too far. You don't rush into something like that unless you have to. You watch first. His hoodie was pulling tight across his back now. Not like he was stretching, like it didn't fit anymore. The fabric bunched along his shoulders, then flattened, then pulled again. Another sound came out of him, low and wet. Not a word. He pushed himself up slowly, not standing, not yet, just enough to get his knees under him. And then he stopped and everything went still for a second. Then he rose, not like a person getting up. His back came up first, hunched and uneven, one shoulder higher than the other. His head stayed down, chin tucked toward his chest like it was too heavy to lift. He stood in the aisle, and he was bigger than he had been when he got on, not by a little. Enough that the top of his hoodie brushed the overhead bar. The bus felt smaller all of a sudden. I didn't move or speak, I just watched him through the gap between the seats. He turned slightly, like he was orienting himself. His arms hung at his sides, but they didn't hang right. There was tension in them, like they were ready to move before he told them to. The woman behind me made a small sound, almost a whisper, and he reacted to it. His head snapped halfway toward the front of the bus. Fast. I took a step back toward my seat. "Stay behind me," I said. The next stop was maybe 30 yards ahead. I could see the sign through the windshield. And I didn't think about it, I just eased the bus forward. He didn't rush, didn't charge. He just stood there in the aisle, slightly turned, like he was deciding something. The breathing came back, louder now. I reached the stop and I hit the brake. The bus hissed as it settled. And for a second, nothing happened. Then I hit the rear door release, and the back doors folded open. And he moved fast. Not running exactly. More like he covered the distance in one motion, cutting through the aisle without touching anything. He hit the back steps and was out of the door before I could even turn fully to track him. I closed the doors immediately, then I sat there for a second, hand still on the wheel. Nobody spoke. The woman behind me didn't move. I pulled back onto the road and kept going. Nobody said a word the rest of that route. When I checked the mirror again, the back of the bus was empty. No sign he'd ever been there. I drove the rest of the night like nothing happened. That's what you do. You keep the route, you make the stops, and you don't think about it too much. But I'll tell you this, in the time he was on that bus with me, whatever he was, he changed. Story 2. The Quiet Woman. I was running the east route. It passes through a mix of older buildings and newer developments, then loops back toward downtown. Usually quiet that time of night. You get a few regulars, people heading to early shifts, a couple of stragglers from the night before, but nothing heavy. Well, I pulled up to a stop just past a row of closed storefronts. There was a woman waiting. She stood a little off to the side of the sign, not directly under it. I remember that because most people stand right under the pole without thinking about it. I don't know, she wasn't hiding or anything, just positioned a little different. I opened the doors, and she stepped on. "Hello," she said. "Oh, hello," I said back. She paid without looking down, dropped the fare clean into the box, then moved down the aisle. She didn't go all the way to the back. Instead, she took a seat halfway down on the left side, one of the spots where the overhead light had burned out months earlier and never got fixed. That section always sat in a kind of shadow, even when the rest of the bus was lit. I noticed it, but I didn't think much of it. Most people just prefer the darker spots. We pulled away from the curb. At the next couple of stops, a few more passengers got on. One of them was a guy I'd seen before, mid-30s maybe, rough around the edges, the kind who talks a little too loud even when nobody's answering him. He came on, paid, and looked around for a seat. And then he saw her. I watched it in the mirror, that quick moment where someone picks a seat and changes their mind halfway through. He walked down the aisle, and he dropped into the seat next to her. I remember thinking he probably wouldn't get much out of that conversation. For a minute or two, nothing happened. The bus moved, the lights outside started to shift from deep black to that early gray, and I kept my eyes on the road. And then I heard him. "So you heading to work?" he asked, loud enough that it carried. No response. I checked the mirror. She was sitting the same way she'd been when she got on, hands folded in her lap, head slightly turned forward, not looking at him. He leaned back a little, tried again. "Long night, huh?" he said. Still nothing. And I've seen that before, people not wanting to engage. Usually the other person gets the message. He didn't though, he was persistent. And that's when I noticed the first thing that didn't sit right. She hadn't moved, not even a little. Not the kind of stillness you get when someone's ignoring you, it was exact. Like her posture hadn't shifted a fraction since she sat down. I glanced back again a few seconds later. He was talking again, saying something I couldn't make out. And she turned her head slightly, just enough to face him. And then she leaned in close, closer than you normally would to hear someone speak. I frowned a little and adjusted in my seat, trying to get a clearer angle in the mirror without being obvious about it. The bus hit a small dip in the road, and for a second I lost the view. When it leveled out, I looked back. And the guy was slumped, head tilted sideways, resting against the window. She was sitting upright again. Same position as before, hands folded, facing forward. I waited a second. Maybe passed out, I don't know, wouldn't be the first time. But something about it didn't match. I leaned slightly, checking the angle again. And that's when I saw it. A thin line of blood. Not a lot, just a narrow trail running down from the side of his neck, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. No movement from him, no reaction. Just still. I felt my grip tighten on the wheel. I didn't stop the bus, didn't say anything. I just kept driving. You run through possibilities in your head in situations like that. Maybe he scratched himself. Maybe he had some kind of medical issue. Maybe I was seeing it wrong. But none of those explanations held up when I looked back again. She hadn't changed at all. Same posture and stillness. The only difference was that now every so often, I swear I could see her eyes shift. Not her head, just her eyes. Forward, then slightly up toward the mirror. I looked away immediately, kept my focus on the road. The next stop was coming up, not one she'd signaled for, but people getting off without pulling the cord sometimes. I slowed the bus. Before I even came to a full stop, she stood up. She walked down the aisle toward the front, and as she got closer I could see her more clearly. Her clothes were clean, neat, nothing out of place. Her face was completely normal, but her eyes, they looked locked. She stopped just behind the line near my seat, and for a second neither of us said anything. And then she looked up, right at me. There wasn't any panic in her expression, no guilt or rush, just awareness. Like she knew exactly what I'd seen. And then, very slightly, she smiled. Not wide or exaggerated, just enough to show that she understood. I opened the doors and she stepped off, just down the steps and onto the sidewalk. I looked back towards the man again, getting ready to check on him, but before I could, somebody else noticed him. "Hey," they said, nudging his shoulder. "You alright?" He stirred after a second, blinking, confused. Yeah, I'm fine," he muttered. He sat up slowly, rubbing the side of his neck. "Man, I must have dozed off." He didn't say anything else the rest of the ride. He just kept looking towards the empty seat next to him. Story 3. The Sick Man. Now this one didn't start the way the others did. Most strange things on a bus begin quietly. Somebody gets on, sits down, keeps to themselves, and you notice something off a few minutes later. This one felt different before the doors even opened. It was raining that night. Not heavy, but steady enough that the road stayed slick and the windshield needed constant attention. The kind of rain that makes everything look a little dimmer than it should, even under streetlights. I was running behind schedule by a couple minutes. Nothing serious, just enough that I was paying a little closer attention than usual. That stretch of road didn't have a stop for another block or two. Still, I saw him. He was standing off to the side of the street, not under any kind of shelter, just out in the rain. One arm raised, trying to flag me down. People do that sometimes, especially when they miss a stop, or don't feel like walking to the next one. You're not supposed to pick them up off route, but after enough years, you learn when to bend that rule. I slowed the bus. Not all the way at first, just enough to get a better look. He didn't move toward the curb, didn't step closer like most people do when they see you slowing down. He just stood there, arms still up, like it was already where he needed to be. I pulled over and opened the doors. He climbed on slowly. Not drunk, not unsteady in that way, just slow, like each step took more effort than it should. "Evening," I said. He didn't say anything. He dug into his pocket, pulled out a handful of coins, and dropped them into the fare box one at a time. Some of them missed the slot and hit the plastic before sliding in. His hand shook while he did it, not violently, but enough that I noticed. Up close, he did not look right. Not in a dramatic way. No obvious injury or blood, nothing like that. Just pale. Skin looked tight across his face, like it didn't quite fit. His eyes didn't focus on anything for long. They moved past me, past the interior of the bus, like he was trying to find something and couldn't quite lock onto it. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, didn't look at me. Then he turned and walked down the aisle. He didn't sit. That was the first thing I noticed. Plenty of people stand for a stop or two, especially if they're getting off soon, but he didn't move like someone waiting for a short ride. He stopped about halfway down the bus, one hand resting on the back of a seat, head angled down slightly. I closed the doors and pulled back into traffic. There were maybe 4 other people on the bus at that point, a couple near the front, one toward the middle on the opposite side, and one in the back. No one said anything when he got on, but I saw a few glances in the mirror. Nothing unusual about that. New passenger late at night. People notice. For the first minute or so, everything stayed quiet. Then I heard the breathing. It was heavier than it should have been. Not like someone out of shape, not like someone who'd been running, just uneven. Each breath came in a little too fast, went out a little too slow. Didn't match the rhythm you expect from someone just standing there. I checked the mirror, he hadn't moved. Still standing, still holding onto the seat. Head down. But his shoulders were moving now. Not much, just enough to match the sound. I looked back to the road. Like I said before, you get used to things like that. People get sick on buses, it happens. Sometimes they ride a stop or two and then get off. Sometimes you have to pull over. It's not uncommon. Another minute passed. I checked the mirror again. He'd moved, but not much. His hand wasn't gripping the seat the same way. It had slid lower, fingers dragging along the fabric, like he was losing strength in them. His head dipped a little further forward. I tapped the brake lightly as we approached the next light. "Hey," I called back, keeping my voice steady. "You need me to stop?" He didn't answer. The light turned red, and I brought the bus to a full stop. And that's when his hand slipped completely. He dropped to one knee. It wasn't a sudden collapse, more like something inside him gave out and the rest of him followed. His other hand caught the edge of the seat, but it didn't hold. He leaned forward, then down, until he was braced against the floor. A couple of passengers stood up near the front, unsure what to do. I was getting ready to go back and check on him when the light changed. I eased the bus forward again, keeping it slow. And then his shoulders jerked. Just once. Sharp enough that I noticed immediately. Then again, a little harder. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Sir?" I said again. No response. His arm shifted, pressing harder into the floor, and then his back arched. It's hard to explain, but it didn't look like normal movement anymore. One of the passengers near the front took a step forward. "Is he having a seizure?" they asked. I checked the mirror again. His head had turned slightly, just enough that I could see part of his face. And then he moved again, slow this time. He shifted his weight from his knee to his feet, pushing himself upward. It took longer than it should have, like his body had to remember how to do it. He stood, not fully upright, but enough to balance. His shoulders were still hunched, his head angled down, but he was standing. Nobody on the bus spoke or moved. The only sound was the engine and that breathing. I glanced ahead at the next stop. It was coming up fast. I didn't think about it too much, I just knew I wanted the doors open. I slowed the bus and pulled in. Before I came to a complete stop, I reached for the door control. The bus hissed as it settled. The doors folded open, and for a second nothing happened. And then he turned and faced the open doors. He went down the aisle, past the seats, past the empty rows, and out through the doors into the rain. I watched him through the mirror as he stepped off. He didn't look back or stop, just moved away from the bus into the dim light of the street until the rain in the distance made it hard to see him clearly. I closed the doors and sat there for a second. Then I pulled back onto the road. Nobody said anything for a while, but eventually somebody sat back up. Another person moved closer to the front. The bus returned to something like normal, but not quite. A few stops later, one of the passengers who had been sitting across from him stood up and came forward. "Hey," they said quietly. "When he fell, did you see his shoulder?" I glanced at them briefly, then back to the road. "What about it?" They hesitated. "Well, it looked like he'd been bitten." I didn't answer, I just kept driving. They stood there for another second, like they expected me to say something. And then they went back to their seat. I finished the route without incident. Same stops and streets and routine. By the time I pulled back into the depot, the rain had stopped. Everything looked normal again. It always does. Story 4. The Woman in the Dress. This one was earlier in my career. Not my first year, but still close enough that I hadn't seen much. Back then, I was still paying attention to every little thing, trying to do everything exactly by the book, making sure I didn't miss anything. It was a normal night. Clear, no rain, no wind. The kind of shift where the air feels still, and the streets look a little too empty for a city. I was running one of the shorter loops, the kind that cuts through a residential stretch before reconnecting with a main road. There's a stop on that route that always felt a little off to me. Not because anything had happened there, at least not that I knew at the time. Just sat in a strange spot. One side of the street had a row of older houses set back a little too far from the road, and the other side was just a long, dark stretch of sidewalk with no real lighting except for a single street lamp that didn't reach as far as it should. I pulled up like I always did. No one was waiting at first. I almost closed the doors and kept moving. And then I saw her. She stepped into the light from just outside the reach of that street lamp. Just enough that I hadn't noticed her until she wanted to be seen. She was wearing a dress. That stood out right away. Not because it was unusual for someone to wear one, but because of the style. Looked older. Not worn or dirty, and just, I don't know, not something you'd expect to see at that hour in that part of town. Light color, simple, fell straight down past her knees. I opened the doors, and she stepped down without saying anything. Didn't look at me, didn't nod, just moved past the fare box, dropped the money in, and walked down the aisle. Her steps were quiet, not completely silent, just softer than they should have been on that rubber floor. I remember noticing it because everything else was so still that even small sounds carried. She didn't go to the back, took a seat about halfway down on the right side. sat upright, hands resting in her lap, facing forward, and I closed the doors and pulled away. There were a couple other passengers on the bus, but nobody paid her much attention. She didn't draw the kind of notice that makes people stare. If anything, she blended in too easily. For the first minute or two, nothing felt out of place. I drove, checked the mirrors, watched the road, and then I glanced up at the rear view. That's when I saw it. She was sitting exactly where I expected her to be. Same posture, same position. But there was an axe in her head. The handle angled slightly backward, buried above the temple, like it'd been driven in from the side. There wasn't blood pouring everywhere. No movement, no reaction from her. I looked away. I didn't know what the hell to do. Looked back to the road. Don't judge me. You have never been in that situation. You don't react right away to something like that. Your mind tries to correct it. Bad angle, reflection, something in the mirror catching light the wrong way. I counted a few seconds in my head, and then I checked again. Same seat, same woman. No axe. Nothing. Her head was normal. Hair in place. No damage. She hadn't moved, didn't look around, didn't change anything. Just sat there like she had when she first got on. I looked in the mirror for a second longer than I should have, then forced myself to look forward again. The road was empty. Streetlights passing in steady intervals. Everything exactly the way it should be. I told myself that's all it was. Bad reflection. Something catching the light. You see strange things in mirrors if you stare at them long enough, especially at night. Well, I kept driving. Minute passed, maybe two. No sounds from the back, no movement. The bus felt quiet again. I glanced back up at the mirror one more time, and for a split second, it was there again. Same position, same angle, a giant axe. I didn't even give myself time to process at that time. I just looked away immediately. Focused on the road, keeping the bus steady. Didn't say anything or stop. When I checked again a few seconds later, she looked normal. Exactly the same as before. Well, at the next stop, nobody got on, nobody got off. I pulled away. Another block, another turn. And then after a few minutes, something else caught my attention. The seat. The one she'd been sitting in. It was empty. I frowned slightly and adjusted my angle, just to make sure I wasn't missing something. But nothing. I scanned the rest of the bus, the front, middle, back. There was nobody standing or walking. No sound of the doors opening. No stop I'd made where someone got off. She was just gone. Well, I kept driving. Didn't call it in or pull over. You learn pretty quickly that not everything you see needs to be turned into a report. By the time I finished the shift, it had settled into the back of my mind like something I'd almost convinced myself didn't happen. Almost. It wasn't until a few days later that it came back. I was talking with another driver during a break. We were going over routes, stops, the usual things. That stretch of road came up in conversation. I mentioned it without thinking. That stop with the houses set back, I said, always feels a little off. He looked at me for a second, then said, "You ever hear what happened there?" I shook my head. He leaned back in his chair. "Years ago," he began, "there was a woman lived on that block. Name was Mary Velvet." I didn't say anything, just listened. "Well, her husband killed her real bad, right in the house. Argument got out of hand and he grabbed an axe. They say he got her right in the head. Just left her there." The room felt quieter after that. I nodded once, like it was just another story. But I remembered her. I remembered the way she looked. I remembered her dress. And I remembered the axe. Story 5. The Birth. This one happened later. Not at the very end, but close enough that I'd already seen most of what the job could throw at me. By that point, I wasn't easily shaken. I'd learned how to keep steady, keep things moving, and not let panic take over when something went wrong. That night started like any other. Late shift, quiet route, hardly any traffic. I had maybe 2 passengers on board, both sitting near the front. The rest of the bus was empty. Streets were clear, lights spaced out just enough that everything felt dim but not completely dark. I remember thinking it was going to be an easy run. And then I saw him. He was standing near the edge of the road, waving both arms. Not the casual kind of signal you get from someone trying to catch a ride. This was different. I slowed the bus right away. When I pulled up and opened the doors, he rushed forward, half turning back as he did. Please, I need help, he said. Then I saw her. She was just behind him, one hand gripping his arm, the other pressed against her stomach. Her face was tight with pain, breathing sharp and uneven. She could barely stay upright. She's in labor, he began. We're not going to make it. I didn't hesitate. Get her on, I said. He helped her up the steps. She winced with every movement, trying to keep herself steady. Once they were inside, he guided her to a seat near the middle, easing her down as gently as he could. I closed the doors and pulled back onto the road. St. John's Hospital, it's about 10 minutes. But she can't. He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. I could hear it in her breathing. This wasn't something that was going to wait. He knelt beside her, trying to keep her calm. It's okay. We're almost there. She shook her head, gripping the seat. I checked the mirror. There wasn't anything I could do except keep the bus steady and moving. And then a voice came from the back. I'm a doctor. I looked up in the mirror. There was a man I hadn't seen before. He was near the back, a few rows in from where the last passengers usually sit. Older, maybe 70s or early 80s. Gray hair under a flat cap, and an old coat. He stood up without any rush. Name's Graham, he said as he walked forward. Let's take a look. There was something about him that settled the air immediately. The husband moved aside without even thinking about it. You could see it in the way he shifted, like he trusted him before he even knew why. Graham knelt beside her. All right, he began calmly. You're doing fine. We're just going to take it one step at a time. His voice was steady. He gave instructions clearly, like he'd done it 100 times. Help me move her back a little, he said to the husband. Easy now, that's it. They adjusted her position across the seats. I kept the bus as smooth as I could, easing off the brakes early, taking turns wide, doing everything I could not to jolt the bus. I watched through the mirror. Her breathing got sharper, more frequent. She cried out once, then again, gripping the edge of her seat. You're all right, Graham said. Stay with me, just like that. I'd never seen anything like it. There was no panic in him. None. I just drove. Time stretched a little in that moment. Hard to say how long it actually took. Could have been a few minutes, but it felt longer. And then everything went quiet, just for a second, then a baby crying. It filled the bus in a way nothing else had that night. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The husband did too. He leaned forward, hands shaking, looking down. Oh my God, he said. Graham moved carefully, finishing what needed to be done, then nodded once. Healthy, he said. You've got a healthy baby. The relief that followed was immediate. The husband kept thanking him over and over, and Graham just gave a small nod. Well, we were coming up on the next stop, and I slowed the bus. Graham stood up slowly. He adjusted his coat, and then turned toward the front. As he walked up the aisle, he glanced at the couple. He smiled at them. Then he walked past, caught my eye, and gave me a small wink. I opened the doors and he stepped off. Outside, the street was empty. There was a light fog rolling across the road, low to the ground, drifting slow, and I watched him through the windshield. He walked forward at the same steady pace he'd had the entire time. Just moved into the fog, step by step. His outline softened as the mist thickened, faded, and then he was gone. Well, I finished out my years on that route. Same streets and stops, same routine I'd been running for more than 2 decades. By the end of it, I could have driven it with my eyes closed if I had to. Every turn, every light, every place where someone might be standing, waiting for you to pull up and open the doors. Most nights were exactly what you'd expect. Quiet. People getting on, people getting off. A few conversations here and there. The usual things you deal with when you're driving late. Nothing that follows you home, nothing that sticks. But not all of it fades like that. There are a few nights that stay clear, sharper, like they never really settled into the past the way everything else did. I still think about that man in the back sometimes, the way he moved, the way he stood there in the aisle like he didn't belong inside his own body anymore, the way he got off without hesitation, like the bus was just one small stop in something else he was dealing with. And the woman in the dress, that one definitely sticks with me. And there are others. You don't forget things like that. Not completely. But if I'm being honest, the one I think about the most is Graham. Not because it scared me, it didn't. That night, it could have gone a different way. I knew it the second I saw them standing there in the road. The way he was waving, the way his wife could barely stand. Didn't take much to figure out how bad it could have gotten if things didn't line up just the right way. And then somehow they did. He was just there. Calm and steady. Didn't rush or hesitate. Just stepped in, did what needed to be done, and made sure everything turned out the way it was supposed to. I've thought about that more times than I can count. Tried to remember if I missed him getting on the bus. Tried to place him somewhere on the route where it would make sense. I never saw him again. Never heard anything about him either. But I remember that moment. Because after everything I'd seen, after all the strange things, all the quiet things that didn't make sense, all the nights where something bad happened, that one was different. There's a lot of strange out there, a lot of things you can't explain, a lot of bad. But after I saw him, I remembered there is good, too.